The first time I said no, nothing happened immediately. That was the part that surprised me. I had spent so long imagining the consequences, building them up in my mind during the months I had been moving toward that moment, that when the word finally left my mouth and landed in the room and the bishop looked at me across the table and the silence stretched out, I expected the world to shift dramatically. I expected something to break open. I expected the full weight of everything I had been warned about to arrive all at once. Instead, there was just silence. And then the bishop said, very quietly, that perhaps I needed more time to consider. And then he left. And I sat at the kitchen table alone with the sound of his buggy moving down the lane and the particular stillness of a house that has just held something significant and is now absorbing it. That was all. That first day. The consequences came later. They always come later. That is the thing nobody tells you about saying no inside a community like mine. It does not punish you loudly or immediately. It punishes you slowly, in the withdrawal of warmth, in the quality of silence that changes in rooms when you enter them, in the accumulating weight of 100 small daily interactions that used to feel one way and now feel another way, and will never feel quite the same again. My name is Miriam. I was 24 years old the first time I said no to my community, and 26 the second time, and this is the story of both. Let me tell you what the first no was about, because the no itself only makes sense inside the context of what was being asked. I had been baptized at 21. I had married at 22. A man named Jonas, steady and quiet, and good in the ways that our community valued goodness. By 24, I had one child and another coming, and I was living fully inside the life that had been built for and around me for as long as I could remember. The ordning held everything in its place. The community held everything in its place. I held my place inside both of them, faithfully, consistently, without, as far as anyone around me could see, complaint. What nobody could see was that I had been having a conversation with myself for 2 years that was getting harder to ignore. Our district had a particular practice around the care of elderly members, a system of community responsibility that meant households took turns housing and caring for members who could no longer manage alone. It was a genuine and beautiful expression of the community's values. I had participated in it since childhood, the way you participate in things that are simply what your community does. The bishop came to our home when I was 24 and told Jonas, not me, Jonas, that our household had been selected to take in an elderly woman named Ada for an extended period. Ada was 81. She required significant daily care. The expectation, unspoken but completely understood, was that this care would fall to me. Jonas worked the land. The care was the wife's domain. This was simply how it was. Jonas came to tell me that evening. He did not ask. He told me, in the way of someone conveying settled information, that Ada would be arriving the following week. He was not unkind about it. He was simply certain, in the way that the framework made everyone certain about the things the framework had already decided. I sat with it for 3 days. I held my infant. I felt the second child moving inside me. I calculated, in the private arithmetic of someone who manages a household and knows its actual dimensions, what adding full-time care of an 81-year-old woman would mean. Not abstractly, concretely. In hours and physical demands and the particular exhaustion of someone who is already at the edge of what they can carry. And then I went to the bishop myself. I want you to understand what that meant. A wife going directly to the bishop to address a community decision that had been made through her husband. This was not done. Not because there was a rule against it exactly, but because the framework assumed the husband was the household's voice with the community. His going to the bishop was the right channel. My going directly was a statement in itself. It said, I am here as a person, not as a household. It said, I have a voice that exists independently of my husband's. It said, The decision made without consulting me needs to be reconsidered. I said all of those things, in careful and respectful language, to the bishop's face. He listened. He was a man who listened, I will give him that. He did not dismiss me. But when I finished, he looked at me with an expression I had not seen before directed at me personally. A mixture of genuine concern and something that was not quite patience, but was performing patience. And he said that he understood my concerns, and that the community valued my faithfulness, and that the care of the elderly was one of the most sacred callings a woman could answer. He had not addressed a single specific thing I had said. He had responded to a different version of the conversation, the version where I was expressing reluctance about a sacred calling, rather than making a practical and specific case about capacity and circumstance. And in doing so, he had, very neatly, placed me in a position where continuing to push back meant arguing against the sacred calling rather than against the specific decision. I said, with respect, I am saying no. The silence was different this time, shorter, more certain. He said, I will speak with Jonas. He left, and what followed was 3 weeks of the particular coldness I described at the beginning. Not dramatic, not announced, just a withdrawal of warmth so consistent and so complete that it had its own vocabulary. Neighbors who had always stopped to talk now found reasons to keep moving. Invitations that had been automatic stopped arriving. My mother-in-law, who had been warm to me since Jonas and I married, became careful in the way of someone who has received information about you that has made them uncertain how to proceed. Ada went to another household. I had won, in the narrow technical sense of the word, and I had paid for the winning in every social currency our community ran on. I understood, after those 3 weeks, something I had only half understood before, that the community's love was real, and that it was also conditional in a way that nobody ever stated directly, but that the 3 weeks had made completely clear. The condition was not cruelty. The condition was simply, you move with us. And when you do not move with us, we notice. And the noticing has a temperature. The second no came 2 years later, and it cost more. By 26, I had 2 children and a third expected. I had rebuilt most of what the first no had cost me, slowly, through demonstrated faithfulness and good work, and the quiet repair that happens when a community decides to absorb an irregularity rather than act on it further. I was back inside the warmth. Not entirely. There was a quality to some interactions that had not fully returned to what it was before, but close enough. Close enough that I had begun to wonder whether the first no had been worth it, and whether the second one I felt building inside me was something I could afford. The second no was about my daughter. She was 3 years old. She was, from the beginning of her life, exactly the kind of person our community found both wonderful and complicated. Curious, direct, confident in a way that had no apology in it, the kind of child who asked why at every possible opportunity and waited for a real answer rather than being satisfied with, because that is how it is. I loved this about her with a fierceness that was not reasonable and did not try to be. Our district's practice for girls her age was to begin shaping certain behaviors early. The curiosity, the directness, the confidence, these were, in the community's framework, tendencies that needed to be redirected toward the Galassan spirit, the yielded spirit, the spirit of a woman who moves through the world with humility and compliance rather than assertion and question. This shaping was not done harshly. It was done with love and consistency and the full sincerity of people who believed they were preparing a girl for a faithful life. My daughter came to me one evening, having been told, for the 3rd time that week by 3 different adults, that her questions were too many and her manner was too forward, and that a good girl learned to be still. She was 3 years old. She looked at me with those clear, undefended eyes that children have before the world teaches them to guard themselves. And she said, "Mama, why do they want me to be quiet?" I looked at my daughter's face. I thought about the first no and what it had cost. I thought about the warmth that had partially returned and the warmth I was about to risk again. I thought about the 3 weeks of careful coldness and what a longer version of it would feel like. I thought about all of it in approximately 4 seconds. Then I said, "They do not speak for me. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to ask them forever. Do you understand me?" She said yes. I went to the bishop the next morning. The second no cost more than the first. The coldness lasted longer. The repair was slower and less complete. There were relationships in our community that did not fully return to what they had been before, and I believe they never will. I carried that cost, and I carry it still. But my daughter is 7 years old now. She asks questions. She waits for real answers. She moves through the world with her confidence intact and her curiosity undiminished. And when she looks at me the way a child looks at someone who told them the truth when the truth was inconvenient. I do not regret the second no. I do not fully regret the first one either. What I carry about both of them is not regret. It is a clear-eyed understanding of what it costs, inside a community built on collective agreement, to be a person who sometimes disagrees. The cost is real. The people who collect it are not malicious, and the no is still worth it. That is what I want to tell you tonight. Not that no is easy, not that no is free, but that some things are worth the price of no. That knowing what those things are, for you, specifically, in your specific life, is one of the most important things you can learn about yourself. For me, it was my daughter's questions. That was the line. That was the thing I could not let the community reshape without losing something I was not willing to lose. What is yours?